We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to the Booked on Rock podcast. I'm Rick Senich. If you haven't yet, subscribe and give the podcast a 5-star review wherever you listen. The website is bookedonrock.com. Author and rock journalist Susan Masino is our guest. She's the author of famous Wisconsin musicians, Rock and Roll Fantasy, My Life and Times with AC/DC, Van Halen and Kiss, AC/DC FAQ, All That's Left to Know About the World's True Rock and Roll Band, The Story of AC/DC, Let There Be Rock, among others. She published her own music newspaper, Rock Central, for 6 years and has written for WI Music News, a monthly music news column, since 1991. She created a radio show for 94.1 WJJO in Madison, Wisconsin, which she produced and hosted from 1997 to 2004. I first interviewed Susan for the Van Halen News Desk back in October of 2020, shortly after the passing of Eddie Van Halen. I heard her on a recent episode of the AC/DC podcast called AC/DC Beyond the Thunder. I just reached out to say hello. Heard you on the podcast. I've got one myself. Anytime you want to come on, just say the word. And here we are. Susan is on the show to talk about her career, some of the bands and artists she met along the way, but I also had something personal I wanted to share with Susan, who is also a psychic empath. Sadly, I just lost my father. He passed on July 21st. It really hit me hard, guys. I am still recovering from it and will for a while. There were a few interesting things that happened since his passing, and I wanted to tell Susan about it and see what she thought. Interestingly enough, I scheduled this interview before my dad passed. It's a story I not only wanted to share with Susan, but you as well. The listeners have been so great with sending condolences on the Facebook page for Booked on Rock. So I hope if you've lost someone close yourself, that this story gives you the peace it has for me. So let's get started. Here is my interview with Susan Masino. Hi, Susan. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. It's great to talk to you again.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
You've had such an amazing career, and what makes for a great podcast are great stories, and you have them. I love the story you tell in your book, Rock and Roll Fantasy, which is your first book, and it involves your doll and the legendary drummer Gene Krupa in 1955. So music has been a part of your life since you can remember. Just to give the listeners a brief background, where are you from, and how did your career as a rock journalist start?
Well, I was born, my parents owned a ballroom in the mid-'50s called the Riverview Ballroom on the Wisconsin River in Sauk City, Wisconsin, and they had everybody, Louis Armstrong, the Dorsey brothers, the infamous drummer Gene Krupa played there. And I was born in 55, so this was probably, I'd say, a year or two later that Gene Krupa was playing in the ballroom, and a lot of this I don't remember. I remember the music coming through the walls, that sort of thing, because our apartment was on the ground floor of the ballroom. But I guess and my parents, would let me play in the ballroom because we had the river in the back of the ballroom and Main Street in the front. So my playground was the ballroom. And I used to play with whatever was on the stage. And apparently I had left a doll, my doll in Gene Krupa's drum kit. So I guess one night my mom loved to tell a story. She was in the kitchen, and our apartment was off the ballroom, then the kitchen, and then our little apartment. And so Gene Krupa came walking in one night with my doll, and he held it up and said, "I bet somebody's looking for this." And she took him into our apartment, and he gave me my doll and tucked me in.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that's. I don't remember it, but I really wish I did. I've always loved drummers, so that might have something to do with it. But my parents were venue owners. They owned, over the years, restaurants, a hotel at one time after the ballroom, and they always had live music. So I was very connected to, seeing musicians load in and load out and, getting to know them and their families and everything. And then in my early 20s, I started writing for a local music paper here in Madison, Wisconsin called the Mad City Music Sheet. And that's really the very beginning, I guess you would say, of my writing career. And I was the only woman at the time writing, and barely writing because they didn't really want to give me anything. It was kind of like, you're a girl, we don't need girls. And so on the day, I'll never forget this, of course, on August 16th, 1977, the day that Elvis died, I was literally driving by the offices of the Mad City Music Sheet, and my intuition said to pull in and try to get an assignment because I was really, trying to get my foot in the door. And I ran in, and the editor had just gotten off the phone, and I asked him if he had anything coming up that I could do, and he said, well, I just talked to Stardate, which is a promoter from Milwaukee, and they need a gopher downtown at this club called the Stone Hearth, which is down on campus here in Madison, Wisconsin. And he said they need a gopher. There's no pay. You might be able to get a friend in for free, but, if you want to do it, you can do that. And, of course, I jumped at it because it was another way to, get closer to working for the paper. And I went running out the door, and I stopped. And I had seen a lot of bands up till this point. I'd seen everybody from Black Sabbath to, Deep Purple and Cream and all these bands, Pink Floyd, during my high school years. So I'd seen a lot of bands. And so I turned around and I said, well, what band is it? And he kind of shook his head and he goes, I don't know. There's some band out of Australia called AC/DC. And I was like, okay. That it didn't ring any bells. I had never heard of them. And I went and changed and went down to the club, and my life has never been the same.
Yeah, I mean, it is evident just how important this band is to your career and on a personal level. You got to know the guys in the band so well. Can you tell the story of Malcolm getting a roar of laughter the first night you met the band? Because he did a little flirting with you from what I read in the book.
Well, they all kind of did, actually. It was
yeah. Really? How could that be?
I don't know. They were flirty guys, especially Bon.
Yeah.
But I had been sent to the liquor store to get Blue Nun wine for the singer, and I was in the dressing room in this club was like in a little loft above the bar. So I was up there, and we had sodas and beer and the deli tray and whatnot, and Blue Nun wine. And I got to know the roadies. There were 3 roadies that were setting up. I got to talk to them for a while, and that's how I met Barry Taylor, who was right around my age, very close to my age, and this was his first tour to the United States with the band. So we started talking, and they had a 1-page bio, which is hilarious, because they weren't that pretty in the pictures. I'm just going to say their pictures were not very flattering, and the biography said, they had just done a tour of the United Kingdom, and the biography said that they had started brawls from one end of the UK to the other. I was thinking, what did I just get myself into? I was a little leery. And so I was up in the dressing room when the band came back from dinner, and they came up the stairs. And as they were walking in the room, I was backing out of the room and saying, drinks are over there, got some snacks for you. If you need a mixed drink, just come on down to the bar. I can get you one down at the bar. And I was leaving. I was trying to get out of the room. And and the first guy that came in, I didn't know who it was at the time, but it was Malcolm. He came and sat down on a couch. Then this guy with, shaggy dark hair, and he had tats up and down his arms, and he walked up to me, shoulder to shoulder, looked me right in the face and screamed, "Sit." So luckily I grabbed a chair and I pulled it over and sat down, and he went over and poured 2 glasses of wine, came back over and handed me a glass of wine and said, "Hi, I'm Bon Scott. You must be Sue." I looked at him and I said, "How do you know who I am?" And then Malcolm said, "Oh, the promoter told us all about you. You're supposed to do anything we want." And I looked at him like, Oh, no. No. I got to sit and chat with them for a while. They were very hard to understand because they all had different accents, some Australian, some English, maybe a little Scottish, in there somewhere. But it was a little hard to get used to it. But then I caught on. But a lot of stuff that they said in front of me, I did not understand until later.
Angus didn't talk at all, right? He was just playing his guitar until showtime? He was quiet?
Yeah, he was really quiet. And what was funny is that the promotional biography that I had, the one-page bio, said that he was this little stick of dynamite. And I thought the whole time that I sat up there and, he tuned his guitars and he just, had his head down. And I'm thinking, wow, what a stick of dynamite that must be. I don't know how that's going to work out.
Then he turns it on when he gets on stage, that's for sure.
Well, and he obviously he conserves all of his energy before he goes on stage.
And again, this is, as you say, 1977.
1977, they just released Let There Be Rock.
Okay.
It was the Let There Be Rock tour, and it was they had just been in the United States like 2 weeks when I met them.
Let There Be Rock.
And they had no airplay, so nobody knew who they were.
An attendance of 100 people. Really? 100 people. Well, that's like you said, because they weren't getting any radio airplay, and you didn't know what to expect, but then the show starts. What went through your mind watching the band perform for the first time?
Oh, my goodness. They came. I had no idea. I had never heard, anything from them. And when I went downstairs, I went by the soundboard, and they came out on stage, and the lights were down, and the rhythm section, which to this day I believe that Malcolm, Phil Rudd, and Cliff Williams best rhythm section in rock and roll.
Unreal, yeah. And a lot of people just assume because it's not Neil Peart and it's not all these complicated arrangements and things. What they do, it's just a machine.
I was just going to say that. It's like a steamroller.
Yeah.
It's like once the rhythm section, breaks into the song, and the first song I heard them play was Live Wire, and so the rhythm section starts, and then Angus comes in, and the spotlight comes on Bon. He's standing on, the front of the stage, no shirt, super tight jeans on, and just launches into Live Wire, and literally the hair on my arm stood straight up. And I just got the chills, and I backed all the way up to the wall behind me and just knew at that moment, didn't take a minute, that I was seeing a phenomenon.
What was the capacity there? 100 people? How many people could have attended?
Oh, gosh, a couple hundred at least, several hundred. I don't know exactly what the club capacity was, but it was pretty, it was like 75 people counting all the bartenders and everybody and the roadies.
Unbelievable. I always try to put my finger on what it is about AC/DC that makes them so great after all these years. It's just that rock solid rhythm section that might be the most key ingredient to it all. It's just addictive. It's like you just keep coming back to it, and the riffs that Angus would play. But as we know, Malcolm, he's like the secret talent there. He's writing a lot of the songs, right?
Oh, yeah. He comes up with all the riffs. He makes all the decisions. His rhythm playing, unbelievable. I mean, I'm speechless when it comes to how solid and powerful Malcolm's playing was.
Yeah.
It just made everything.
And the band slowly rose to prominence. 1977, they're a couple years away from really blowing up with the Highway to Hell album in 79, but they worked their asses off touring and recording constantly. What did the guys talk about regarding those early days, fighting and scrapping their way to the top?
Oh, God, just being broke.
Yeah.
I mean, when I met them, they were driving around in a station wagon with a 26-foot Ryder truck and 3 roadies and staying at, just like It's a Long Way to the Top, staying in rundown motels and not having a lot of money to eat. And, they struggled. They really did. They didn't start seeing good money, for a couple years yet.
Yeah, 79. So, it would probably be there.
And they toured constantly. Just they were on the road all the time or in the studio.
And just as they reached their peak, Bon is gone in 79. How often did you see the guys or interview the guys before Bon's passing? When was the last time you spoke to them or Bon?
Oh, my goodness. I saw him a couple of times in 77, a couple of times in 78, and a couple of times in 79. Anytime that they came through, Madison, Milwaukee, Chicago, Rockford area, I was always there at those shows. And the last time I saw Bon was in October of 79 when they played the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago, and I knew they were exhausted. They were going to leave the States, they were going to go home for the holidays, and then they were going to go right to London to start working on the next album. And Highway to Hell had just hit in 79 where they finally started getting this airplay that they had worked so hard for. So everybody's spirits were really up, and everybody was excited because they thought, well, Highway to Hell broke through now. Now we're on the airwaves in the United States. This next album is going to be very crucial for them. So everybody was excited, but they were exhausted at the same time.
And it turns out Bon was a misunderstood guy. He was very sensitive and kind to people. He was very good to friends, and he would remember those who he met along the way.
Yeah, no, he was. You would never know he was a rock star if you didn't know what he looked like, and he just came in and hung out. He'd just be always talking to everybody, making jokes, being silly, but never acted like, do you know who I am? None of the band ever acted like that. They never changed the way from the time that I met them in 77 till even the last time I talked to Angus, and I think it was 2015. He never changed. They never changed their attitude about life or where their place was. I mean, they knew they had a hell of a good band, but they didn't expect people to bow down to them. Like, unfortunately, some rock stars tend to be that way.
Yeah, never got to them. Never got to them. Yeah, any of the guys. And what do you make of Bon wanting to get into different things, like a solo career, or make a country album? You've heard about all those rumors.
Yeah, I think, he always made a joke about that, that his solo album would be called Bonfire, and, but I think he was just, it's something, he always looked to the future of that, but I think he was, just as happy as everybody else that the Highway to Hell album had finally broke them. And that, this next album they were really excited about. This was going to really take them all the way.
There's always the talk that he wrote the lyrics to Back in Black, most or if not all. What's your take on that?
Well, I know that all the titles were chosen. And I know that Bon, he was in the studio just a couple of days before he passed, and he played, he came up with the drum intro to Have a Drink on Me, because he originally was a drummer. And he came in and jammed with Angus and Malcolm just a few days before he passed. So, I know that much, and I do know that he kept notebooks and, notes and phrases and things that he saved, but he pretty much waited until all the music was recorded, and then he would go in and write the lyrics to it.
Wow. Yeah, I want to ask about the Brian Johnson years, because that's when I jumped on board. I'm born in 72, so I was listening to that era mostly on the radio and then eventually go back into the Bon years. But what do you think of the Brian era?
Oh, it's a miracle, for one. Personally, I wanted them to continue, of course, after Bon passed, but I couldn't imagine them finding somebody that would even be close to Bon, the power and, the charisma that he had on stage. And now that I've known Brian, since 1980, Brian, I believe, was born to step into the shoes of Bon, because personally, I mean, they have different singing styles, of course, but personally, they're very similar. Brian is very down to earth, always kidding around. I swear he could be a stand-up comedian. And he again, over the years, has never changed as far as how he treats people, how considerate he is to his fans, and how honored he was really to step in for Bon. I mean, that was a huge honor. He was a fan himself, so that was a big deal for him. And he was terrified in the beginning, absolutely terrified.
Big shoes to fill there, and that album has become one of the biggest selling albums in music, period, not just rock and roll. It's just Back in Black. Man, that's the first album I may have bought from AC/DC, then got Highway to Hell, and those two albums back to back, it's amazing. Be interesting to see what Bon would have sounded like on those Back in Black songs, but
right.
We'll never know. The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. The Booked on Rock podcast is online at bookedonrock.com. Find a list of all the major platforms where you can listen and subscribe to the podcast. Link up to our social media sites. Find out the latest Books on Rock releases. Find your nearest bookstore. And if you want to reach out to us, you can contact us through our website, bookedonrock.com. You write about how AC/DC became the inspiration for you to follow your rock and roll heart and achieve your dream of becoming an internationally published author. Can you talk about how the band inspired you?
Oh, my goodness. Watching what they did of, you never give up. If you want to do something, you got to go after it. And I honestly, I wrote for papers. I did articles for newspapers, basically. And then in, I believe, 1990, I'm trying to think if that's the right year, I decided to write my first book because everybody at the paper, I had switched from the Mad City Music Sheet to, I went with these guys that started a paper called the Emerald City Chronicle right after I met AC/DC. And so when I interviewed them in December of 1977 on their second leg of the U.S. tour, that interview appeared in the Emerald City Chronicle paper. But we had all known, because of all the things that we had experienced, that somebody's got to write a book about this. We're seeing history. We're seeing rock and roll history right in front of our eyes. So it took me a long time to finally sit down and say, I'm going to write about this. I'm going to actually write a book about it. And that was Rock and Roll Fantasy, which I self-published in 2001. So I guess, I wrote it in 1995 and eventually published it as a CD-ROM that you could put into your computer. And because, publishing your own book at the time was way too expensive. And I'd gotten rejected by a couple of publishers. And Angus actually was the one that suggested I self-publish it. He had the idea of doing that, and I did. And I sold, the CD-ROM sold in at least 14 countries I sold copies in. And that just led to another deal for me to write famous Wisconsin musicians, where I had Wisconsin boy, Les Paul, write the foreword for me. I ended up becoming friends with him. And then that book led to Omnibus Press, who is with Music Sales Group. They actually published AC/DC's tablature books. And I met them at the Book Expo in Chicago of 2004, and they're the ones that hired me to write the story of AC/DC, Let There Be Rock. It wasn't even my idea, it was theirs.
Rock and Roll Fantasy, My Life and Times with AC/DC, Van Halen, Kiss. That picture on the cover, that's you with the guys in the band. Where was that taken, and what do you remember about that photo? You got Bon there leaning on your shoulder, Angus with that crazed look on his face.
Well, I love that picture, and what the circumstances were, they were playing, they were playing Alpine Valley, which is in East Troy, Wisconsin. They were opening for Aerosmith, so now they're, coming up the ladder. It was August of 1978, and the photographer that worked for the paper, he always took the cover pictures of everybody, and then he would tell me to, jump in and get a picture with the band. And so we his name is Tom Giles, and he's got a website, by the way. He's selling prints of all of his work from then, and he's got pictures of everybody, and really great pictures. So he took the cover shots for AC/DC, and then he told me to jump in, and so we took one that is, I call the behaving picture, where everybody was behaving.
Yeah.
And then he took the picture, and that was kind of the end of that. And Bon, walked over to me, got closer to me, and put his head on my shoulder and looked up and did a little squeal like he always does. And I leaned back. When he leaned on me, I leaned back onto Angus's shoulder, and I heard Tom click another shot. And that's the picture that's on the cover.
That's the
and
one.
I love that picture.
We should plug your friend's website. What's the website people can go to check out his photos?
Look up TomGiles.com, Giles. And he's, he just started. I don't have the website. I'm sure it's on there, though, of where he's selling prints of all these bands. I mean, he took pictures of everybody because we had Kiss and Cheap Trick and, Van Halen. He took the infamous shot of me with Van Halen.
I know that one.
So he took a lot of great shots.
Is it GilesPhoto.com? I'm looking at
Yes. He's got a lot of good stuff, and he was always there with the camera. So back in those days, of course, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't walk around, and I purposely didn't, bring a camera because when you have a camera, people act differently. They
Right.
don't just hang out and be silly and goofy and stuff if you're walking around snapping pics of them. So I didn't even think about taking pictures.
What did you think of Axl Rose's job standing in for Brian Johnson in 2016?
Well, I have to admit I was skeptical.
Yep, same here.
I was, when I first heard about it, I just was like, what, Axl Rose? No, kind of like, he doesn't deserve that, sorry, all you Guns N' Roses fans out there. I'm a bit protective over AC/DC, so, but I was interested in it, but skeptical, and I went to see them at the Phillips Arena in Atlanta, Georgia. I believe it was September of 2016, and this was, he had just gotten into the band maybe a couple weeks before this. And I was impressed. I really was surprised and impressed. He did a really great job.
Interesting, too,
So
because
I
his
there.
stage presence was different because he was just taking a step back. It's not my band, so Angus is going to do
Right.
his thing. Yeah, I thought that was cool, too.
To me, the attitude that I kind of saw on stage was kind of a kid in a candy store.
Yeah, exactly.
He was pretty excited.
His voice really worked well with the Bon years. I thought more so than even the Brian stuff, which he did great. But the Bon years, he really nailed it.
Oh yeah. No, they hadn't done this song in years, and one of my favorites, they played "If You Want Blood, You Got It,"
Yeah.
and Axl just nailed it.
Yeah.
He did a great job, and I was thrilled because that's one of my favorite songs.
Do you have a personal pick album during the Bon era and album during the Brian era?
Oh, God, that's pretty easy. I mean, for me, Power Rage with Bon and probably Back in Black with Brian.
Yeah, Power Age does get a lot of love. And
Yeah, I love that album. That to me sounds like what they sounded like, when I first met them. The rawness of it. There's a certain, like unpolished feel of that album, and I just love that album. I love all the songs on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, but there isn't a bad AC/DC album in my opinion. I mean, there are albums during the years with Brian. I think where Malcolm he had some problems with alcohol, so his contributions weren't as solid as they were in previous years. And then when he comes back in 1991, you see when he's back on his game, the Razor's Edge.
Oh, yeah.
And there you go. Hello, but they still had some great moments, some really cool moments. I thought Flick of the Switch was an interesting one because that was kind of panned. They said they kind of rushed that one. They did a very raw like the old days, but it didn't pan out.
But they were so burned out, too, by that time. After Bon's death, they never took time off to really grieve and to heal. And during the 80s, that's when Malcolm, left the road and went to quit drinking because they were devastated when Bon died, and they just kept going. They didn't really have time to even think about what had happened, and so I think sometimes during the 80s, some of the albums they weren't that happy with. They were just burned out.
But there are still some good moments. Fly on the Wall, I thought was cool. They had some good songs on there. Not solid from start to finish, but Blow Up Your Video is the one I was thinking. I had a roommate in college that had it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm saying, where are they? I don't recognize any of these songs, but I gave it a listen, and it was good. I liked it. But again, they were trying some the production of Blow Up Your Video was very late 80s. It was different, but I still enjoyed it, and they hung on, man. They obviously, as a touring entity in the 80s, they were doing just fine, but then they come back with the Razor's Edge and just an amazing career. And, here we are. And I want to ask you about Power Up. What did you think of the latest album, Power Up? And have you heard anything about a tour? Are they able to do that with Brian?
Well, I love the album. It's very, kind of heart-wrenching because it, was dedicated to Malcolm, and of course, the song "Mists of Time," that's hard, because it's hard to think, as I said before, it's hard to think about Malcolm not being here anymore. But I love the album. I think they did a great job, and I'm still hoping that we're going to see a tour at some point. I think because of the COVID thing going on, it's been really hard because AC/DC does not like canceling shows, for one thing. Anytime that they've ever canceled a show, they always go back and add it at the end of the tour. And
that was the reason why Axl took over. There's a lot of money on the line, too, so they couldn't just shut everything down, and that was the solution.
Oh, yeah. They have, over 100 people out on tour with them. And once you're on tour, like you said, that's a lot of money on the line, and they're not the type of band that, is going to take that risk of, going out and then being shut down somewhere in the middle of it. So I'm still praying, though, maybe 2023.
And I guess Brian has solved whatever that issue was with his hearing that took him off the road in 2016. He somehow, I remember reading something that he was able to get a specialist, a hearing specialist, to give him something that helped. Do you know more about that?
Well, I know that somebody developed some inner ear things for him.
Right.
That would allow him to be able to be in front of that kind of volume and not damage his hearing. And it's, I know that they worked on it for a really long time, so it sounds, revolutionary, and I think, Brian's even said that. So, that's exciting. That gives them the opportunity to go back on tour if they do plan one.
When was the last time you talked to Malcolm before he passed? He passed November of 2017.
Oh, my goodness. It was quite a while before that. I saw them in, 2009. I saw them 4 times on the Black Ice tour. But I would say, I think it was August again, of 2009 in Chicago, that I was backstage with Angus and Malcolm, and that night I noticed that Malcolm wasn't as chatty as he usually was, because Malcolm really liked to talk, believe it or not. He wasn't in a lot of interviews. He always seemed very quiet and in the background and that sort, but he was always very chatty in person. And he wasn't like that night, and I just kind of chalked it up to, he's got to be tired. He's exhausted. They've been on the road now for, going on a year, and they ended up on the road. I think that tour went almost 19 months, and I had no idea that he was having those types of problems at all. Last time I saw him play was in May 19th. It was Phil Rudd's birthday, 2010, in Udine, Italy. I got to see them there. Malcolm was only on the road for a couple more weeks, and then that was the end of him ever touring again. When I first met him, he'd only been in the United States for about 2 weeks, and then the last time I saw him, he was only on the road for about 2 more weeks. So I was there at the beginning and at the end. Unfortunately, I had no idea that we would never see him on stage again.
It's interesting you talk about him being quiet, and I was talking to you before we started recording, and I'm going to bring this up again at the end because you have a paranormal background, and so my dad, he had dementia, and that was one of the things that we noticed. He was quiet. So I think that the dementia, we were always wondering, they're thinking all the same things, but they're not able to say it. It's something that happens with that dementia. And he really, I mean, how he went out there and how did he go out there and perform? Like, I mean, he had to remember.
Oh, yeah, it's unbelievable that he did. And, so heartbreaking now to know that Angus, had to go over songs with him before he went on stage, songs that he'd been playing for decades. And he, they kept that all quiet. Nobody knew that was going on except the band. And that had to have been so hard on Angus, hard on Malcolm too, of course, but to see his older brother, not remembering songs that he had been playing for decades, that just had to have been just devastating. I mean, I thought losing Bon was sad, but then when Malcolm went, the world isn't the same for me anymore.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Like the Booked on Rock podcast? Tell a friend and give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Your Kiss story plays off of AC/DC. You led the chapter on Kiss by saying you were more excited to see AC/DC, who was coming to Milwaukee in a few days, but you were introduced to Kiss and you partied with Kiss. So that was a scenario. You're like, I want to see AC/DC. Who's this band Kiss? And lo and behold, you end up meeting these guys too. By the way, Peter Criss, Gene Krupa was his guy. That was his favorite drummer, right?
Yeah. Yep, that's right.
So, can you tell the story of how you met Kiss and how that whole story begins with your association with Kiss?
I got assigned to go cover them at the Coliseum in Madison, Wisconsin. I believe it was December 3rd of 1977, and I was going to Milwaukee the next day to do an interview with AC/DC because they had come back into the States. So I wasn't a big Kiss fan. And I didn't want to do the assignment because I wanted to get ready to go to Milwaukee, and I was I was just crazy about AC/DC, and my editor kind of strong-armed me into, we need somebody to cover the show. So I went to the show, and on a break, I think between the opening band and when Kiss came out, my friend and I walked by these two guys with laminates, hanging from their necks, and they stopped us, and they said, are you coming to the party later? And we didn't know what they meant, and so they said, go to the governor's suite at the Edgewater Hotel, and there's going to be a party afterwards, and you have to give this name to the gentleman at the door. You have to verify that you've been invited, I guess. And I wasn't that happy about it because I wanted to go home and get ready to go to Milwaukee the next day. And my girlfriend and I ended up going to the party. We rode up in the elevator with Paul Stanley and his bodyguard, which was hilarious because I wasn't that impressed. My girlfriend, I thought she was going to faint. And the band didn't have makeup on. Yeah. And at the time, it was really, really secretive of what they looked like.
You got to see what they look like when the rest of the world wanted to know.
Yeah. So, so I went to the party, and actually, I had heard about Gene Simmons' book, if you will, of women that he liked to have relations with and then take pictures of. They teased me at the paper about, don't end up in the book. And so I was really determined not to get involved with Gene Simmons, if you will. So when he came into the party that night, he was about 6'9" in his high heel shoes. He wore a brown pan velvet jumpsuit, and he had all these gold chains, and he had this big belt buckle, and encased in plexiglass was a dead tarantula spider.
What? Was that something he wore on stage?
No, this was his party gear.
Gene.
And of course he was taller than anyone in the room, so it was really hard to avoid eye contact with him. And he, every time he looked over at me, I'd look somewhere else. And then when he'd come over to the other side of the party, I'd go to the other side of the party. I was just avoiding him, as much as I could. And there was another party going on downstairs in a different room. And at one point, my girlfriend and I decided, hey, let's go to the other party and see what's going on down there. So we went down the hall, and, I had avoided Gene this whole time. I was doing pretty good at it. And and we went down the hall to the elevator and pressed the button, and the elevator door opened, and the first thing I saw was a tarantula in a belt buckle. And I looked up, and Gene was standing right in front of me, and I said, "Oh, hell no." And I turned around and started walking down the hallway, like, I'm out of here. And he started following me. And he kept trying to stop me. He kept saying, "Hi, I'm Gene. What's your name? I'd really like to meet you." And I'm like shaking my head, like, no, that's okay. And I wouldn't look at him. I was afraid to make eye contact. So I thought, he terrified me. He really did. I was terrified. And we got to the end of the hallway, and I'm still looking at the floor, and he's, like towering over me. And I all of a sudden I look at his boots. I'm looking at his boots now, and I said, "Oh wow, those are really cool boots. Could I see them?" And he goes, "Well, yeah." And he leans over to pull up a pant leg, and I ran out of the exit door. I mean, ran like for my life, and ditched him completely. Well, a couple days later, I had to call him to see if I could get an interview from him because he stayed in town. They were all working on their solo albums, and he was actually recording at Full Compass Studios in Madison. And I had to call him. He took the call, and all he wanted to know was why I wouldn't meet him, why I wouldn't introduce myself. And then the funniest part was about 2 weeks later, AC/DC opened for Kiss. They did 5 or 6 shows, and opened for Kiss. And my friend Barry Taylor, who was working with AC/DC, I think it was in Indiana. He called me from a payphone, backstage payphone, and the first thing he said to me was, "What did you do to Gene Simmons?" I thought, nothing. Why? Why would you ask that? And he says, "He's telling everybody about you. You really freaked him out. He's telling everybody there's this crazy blonde journalist in Madison, Wisconsin, and if you ever play there, that you gotta meet her." And when he found out that AC/DC already knew me, he laughed even harder. But so I think cool. I'm the only woman that can claim that I actually ran away from Gene Simmons.
Yeah, that's so great. Have you seen him over the years? Have you run into him since then?
No, not really. I mean, I've seen him at some meet and greets and never really said anything to him about it. So still a little intimidated, I'd say.
Yeah. What about the other guys? You did mention Paul. What about Peter Criss and Ace Frehley? What were those guys like?
Well, Paul I never really spoke to, but I ended up partying with Peter and Ace, and they were trouble. Let's put it that way.
Legendary partiers. Trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, they were major partiers, and that wasn't exactly Gene's favorite thing,
Nope.
Or Paul. Gene and Paul were not partiers, and I think that's what, eventually happened with that, was Peter and Ace kind of got off the path there for a while and ended up having to leave the band. So
that's where things went wrong. Yeah.
Yep.
And this was, what year did you meet Kiss? Around 70s?
That was December 3rd of 1977. They played the Coliseum in Madison, Wisconsin.
Author Susan Masino is our guest. Are you active on social media? Susan, I know you have a website, susanmasino.com. Do you have?
Oh, yeah. Yep. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, eventually TikTok. I still haven't done any TikTok videos, but I'm planning on doing some. So right. Pretty easy to find.
Cool. And I first interviewed you shortly after the passing of Eddie Van Halen, and that was in October of 2020. I love this story, though, if you could tell it again, the night you first met the band and the infamous photo. When and where did you meet the band, and how did that night go down?
It's funny because I was already crazy about AC/DC, and I didn't think that there was anyone that could be any cooler. And then I believe about February of 78, we got a red vinyl album in the mail to the paper with 4 songs on it. And we put it on the turntable and heard Eruption, and my mind was completely blown. I was everybody reacted that way of, who is this? So we got really excited about Van Halen coming to Wisconsin because they were on tour now. With their first tour was with Montrose and Journey, and they were going to play in Madison. So we were very excited about it. And we'd done a lot of promoting and talking about it and everything, and just super excited to see, this guy, Eddie, how does he play guitar like that? It just, all of them were amazing. And so they got bumped off the date with Montrose and Journey. Were playing at the Orpheum Theater in Madison, and they didn't want to deal with 3 bands, so they gave Van Halen the night off. And when my editor, Michael St. John, heard about it, he just, oh my God, he just flipped out. He said, I was the one that set up tickets, photo passes, interviews, that sort of thing. And so I talked to the record companies all the time. So he said, call Warner Brothers, see if you can get them booked into a club. So I called Warner Brothers. I gave them Headliners and the Shuffle In, two clubs here in Madison. Gave them the phone numbers and said, you cannot let Van Halen sit without playing somewhere. You can't do this. And sure enough, about 3 hours later, I got a call back from my contact at Warner Brothers that they had booked him into the Shuffle In on March 7th. And they had come to Madison. They got rooms on the 7th floor of the Sheraton Hotel. And they were there for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night. And Tuesday night they played the club. And our paper came out every other Tuesday. So the day they played was when we announced it in the paper, even though, a lot of people had heard it on the, through the grapevine that they were going to play. But that night, the club was pretty much, I'd say 600 or 700 capacity at the most. And there had to have been like over 1,000 people there that night. It was insane. Wow. And I got to hang out with them in the dressing room, which was down in the basement of the club. And I got to meet all of the band, and Eddie was playing on a little practice amp and his guitar, much like Angus, just, sitting on a couch, playing his guitar, being very soft-spoken. And he asked us if we wanted to hear the first song that he ever played on guitar, and we said sure, and he played Pipeline for us. And then they blew the club away. I mean, it was just, their show was completely mind-blowing, never seen anything like it before.
Insane.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. Was Dave doing a lot of his stuff on, did he have enough room to do all of his splits and all that stuff?
He didn't have a lot of room, but he did, he didn't do any real high-flying stuff because it wasn't that big of a stage. But he managed to entertain people, believe me.
Oh, yeah.
I did see him after that several times where I got to see him do, the jumps and the kicks and all of that. And I thought they were amazing. And but they were intimidating too because, they're from California and, I'm a girl from the Midwest, and I'd met a lot of bands, and these guys, they knew they were going to be just huge. They knew it. It just like, it'll be about 5 minutes and we're going to be internationally famous kind of thing. And so the night that before the show, we took cover pictures in the basement, Tom Giles. And he said, okay, he got all the shots he needed. And then he said, okay, jump in. And I said, nah, that's okay. I never refused to be photographed with a band. And these guys, I thought, as soon as I stand up in front of them, somebody's going to get grabbed. And that somebody will be me. And I wasn't having it. So I said, no, that's okay. And so that the band started making a big deal out of it. Like, oh, we're not good enough for her. I see. And they were fake crying and, doing all these boo-hoo stuff.
Laying it on thick.
Yeah. And I walked up to him and I looked at all 4 of them and I said, if anybody touches me, no picture. And I turned around and crossed my arms. And so, David, he was touching my elbow ever so slightly. Michael was behind me. Alex was on my left, and he leaned in so I could feel his hair on my neck. But Eddie bent down. He was on the left of me, and he bent down. And everybody started giggling, especially the photographer. And I thought, well, what's so funny about that? He's just trying to fit into the picture, is what I assumed. And a couple of days later, when I went to work, Tom came up to me with a couple of prints, and he said, you want to know why, everybody was giggling the other night when we took pictures? this is why. And Eddie, I had on these really wide-legged dress pants. And if I would have felt this, not only would I hit the ceiling, but Eddie would have got punched, for one thing. But it looks like his hands are around the top of my thigh in the picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they thought it was really funny, though. They thought they were so clever. And I have an autograph from Eddie that says, "To Sue, I love your thighs."
Oh, man. I love it. I love it. And, as we lost Malcolm, we lost Eddie. And it's crazy to think that those two guys are not walking this earth making great music anymore. It's just still hard to wrap your head around,
It is, yeah. No, it's very sad, and, lots of good memories for sure. Many years of memories.
What do you think about all this Van Halen news regarding a tribute? Jason Newsted of Metallica, he let it slip that he was contacted by Alex and Dave, and then Michael Anthony was contacted, and now the story is that Dave is holding things up. What do you make of all that?
I'm listening more to what Wolfie has to say, Eddie's son, because it's all, it's promotion, it's press, it's, everybody saying different things, and it would be a hard thing. I mean, I've heard that they've talked to people like Joe Satriani would, play Eddie's parts in a tribute to him or something like that, and Joe is an incredible guitar player. But as far as what it sounds like through Wolfie, that I don't think it's going to happen.
Would you like to see a tribute? And if so, what would be the perfect tribute? A concert, a tour, or who would take part in it? What would be your ideal, or not at all? Just let it go.
I kind of think let it go, because nobody played like Eddie. Nobody.
Right.
And even having somebody try to play his parts, for me, it would just be, and nothing against who would do this, who would actually be the person, but it would just be more of, it's not Eddie, he's not Eddie, and Eddie's not here.
Yeah, and there's a lot of hype about it, and it's fun to talk about, and it's fun to write articles, and people were on the radio like Eddie Trunk talking about it. But yeah, it's almost like, guys, you got to remember, right? Like, Eddie's gone, so I don't know. Is this real? Yeah. From a fan's perspective, I'm hearing you. If Alex wants to do it, then hey, do it. If that means something to him, then do it. The question is too, David Lee Roth, now he can't do the things he did back in his prime, and totally understandable. I mean, he's 67. I think he turns 67 in October. So it's you can't expect that. So maybe it's just best, to leave it as is. But I hope Dave's doing good. There's news that maybe he's not. And hope that's not true. Although he was seen at an airport in LA recently. Did you see that clip?
No, I didn't. I haven't seen that recent one, but I've been keeping up, and he's been doing good. He's been, putting out new music and new artwork, and, so he's keeping busy.
I want to ask you about Cheap Trick. Your association with the band is interesting because you were in charge of handling the band's fan mail. How did that all happen?
Well, actually, my boyfriend at the time was in a band called Punch, and Punch was managed by Ken Adamany, who actually also managed Cheap Trick. And I was in need of a job at the time, and I was hired to handle their fan mail, Cheap Trick's fan mail. And this was before computers. So I had, spreadsheets and index cards and an electric typewriter. And there was about 10,000 people in their fan club at the time. And then when the album broke, Live at Budokan broke in Japan, they started getting box loads of fan mail from Japan. And so much so that it filled up a storage room of mail. And that was part of my job. And I'm just one person, and I'm dealing with all these, all the rest of the world, really. And I had a meeting with Ken and suggested, because of the volume of mail that they were getting from Japan now, I was the one actually that sat down with Ken and suggested that he start a fan club merch company over in Japan, so the Japanese fans can actually write to somewhere local to them and be answered back by people that, a lot of them wrote in English, but not all of them. And I just thought it would, be easier all the way around if they had a place in Japan that they could contact for the band, and he did. He opened a company over there. So I didn't have to go through the whole, 8 by 10 foot room filled with boxes of fan mail from Japan.
And you did get to see one of Rick Nielsen's many, many guitars, a huge guitar collector. And he would have guitars shipped to the office that you worked at, right?
Yes. I used to get to see him when they first came in, and so pretty. Some of them were. I remember one that was like a 50s mint green Stratocaster, I think it was, and it was just it was beautiful.
Very cool. Singer Robin Zander and the bassist Tom Peterson, they're known as the good-looking half of Cheap Trick, and you received more than a few nude photos for those two guys.
Oh, yeah, yep, and marriage proposals.
Oh.
Lots and lots of marriage proposals.
What an interesting band.
That was fun.
The two guys that were like just super good-looking pinups, and then you got the drummer, Bunny Carlos,
yep.
and you got Rick Nielsen. They're just like two cut-ups, and the great thing about Bunny Carlos is he looked like some dude who worked in an office. He's just...
Oh, yeah, the accountant.
The accountant, right, exactly.
With a cigarette in his mouth. Yep.
Yeah, that's so funny. And the guys in the band did come into the office.
Oh, yeah. I've known them. I met them back in 77, and, I know them to this day, and especially Robin. Robin is really sweet, and, they'd come in and do meetings at Ken's offices and stuff, and, just a lot of excitement when the album, broke in Japan, and, oh, my God, the bookings, the phones went crazy after that, The band was in high demand, and it was a really exciting time to see that. And actually, they did a lot of dates with AC/DC, and Cheap Trick was the only band that AC/DC ever had them play encores together.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. They loved Cheap Trick, and AC/DC got along really well. Sometimes they would take turns who went on first. And then they would, when encore time came, they would come out and do encores together. That is the only band, that AC/DC ever did that with during those days when they were on tour all the time.
Robin Zander's voice is still so good after all of these years.
I think he's one of the best rock singers ever. First time I saw them, the first time I saw them was at the Stone Hearth in July of 77. Their first album just came out, and when I saw them that night, that was the last club date they played. Then they went on tour. They were opening for Robin Trower the second time I saw them.
Robin Trower,
so,
yeah.
Got to see them skyrocket into superstardom as well.
Oh, yeah. Any band that you didn't get to cover or meet that you wished you did, or band or artist?
Well, I covered David Bowie's band when David Bowie played in Milwaukee, and I became friends with Leslie West from Mountain. He was actually in Milwaukee the night that I saw Van Halen with Journey and Montrose. He's from New York, but he was in Milwaukee living with his manager at the time, and so I met Leslie West. And he was, a friend of David Bowie's, so I went to Milwaukee with two other writers because David Bowie had like 8 guys in his band. So we spent all afternoon interviewing all the guys. And that night, there's no cell phones, and I don't have a pager, and I don't check in. I don't think that we never checked in at night, like, hey, what's going on? And so that night, I saw the band. I interviewed, Roger Powell, Adrian Belew, Carlos Alomar, all these great guys that played with David. And I come back to the office the next day, and they're like, why didn't you call in last night? And I said, well, I never call in. Why would I call in? And I guess Leslie was trying to get a hold of me because I was invited out to dinner with him and David Bowie that night. So that is definitely one regret.
Oh, man. Yeah, David Bowie. What an interesting guy. What a fascinating guy. Yeah, that's...
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, I probably wouldn't have been able to eat a bite of food, though.
Right.
I probably would have fainted. So.
Right, exactly. So what's next for Susan Masino? Any books planned that you can tell us about?
I'm working on my stories right now of throughout my life because I have a billion stories, and I'm writing it in short story form, and that's kind of what I'm working on right now. So, promoting what's already out there. I give speeches. I'm going to be giving a talk in a library here in Wisconsin in September on famous Wisconsin musicians. So I do a lot of interviews. I do, public speaking engagements, and I'm still working on my stories. So.
And you have that paranormal background, which I want to get to the story that I have for you regarding my dad, but just brief background. You have a special skill.
I am a psychic empath. I've seen a lot of activity. I've seen ghosts. I've seen full body apparitions. I have prophetic dreams. But this is really funny because when I dream about AC/DC, if I see anybody in the band in the dream, I make a note of it because it will manifest even if it's years later. And yeah, I've had a lot of, Bon has visited me in dream state many times. And actually, when I saw them in Italy, I had in 2010, I keep a dream journal. And in 2005, I dreamed I was at an AC/DC concert outside, bright sunny day, and the tour manager was arguing with a roadie who was speaking Italian. And 5 years later, it's like, no, I didn't just book a trip to Italy to fulfill that. I was invited there for a book signing, and I went and saw them in Udine, Italy, and I did see them on a bright sunny day in Italy 5 years after I dreamed it.
How about that? I don't know how many people have this. I've heard other people that get the same thing. Like something will come to me and I'll say, well, I've seen all this. I've heard all this. Like I was the other day, I was like, everything that people were saying to me around me, or what I was looking at on the computer screen, all of that happened. What is that? I mean, that's similar to it, like when you're dreaming and then it happens 5 years later, right? Okay.
Yeah, yep. It's deja vu, they call it. And, that happens very frequently that, you are, I've had that too, where you have a conversation with someone and you stand there and you're thinking, didn't I just talk to them about this?
Right. And that,
so yeah, it's really weird but cool at the same time. I love stuff like that. Yeah,
it's like, what do you take from that is basically that there are things in our lives that are planned out. Maybe not everything, but certain things.
I think so. Yeah, and Einstein himself actually believed that the past, present, and the future are all happening at the same time. Maybe sometimes we, go back in time, and sometimes we flash into the future and see things.
Is there a difference between a psychic empath and a medium or a clairvoyant? Like you hear a lot of those different titles.
Yeah, I'm kind of part of all of that. I don't call myself a medium because at this point I don't read people, but I can pick up on energy from people. And I can, sometimes I hear, things like I went to Gettysburg and I had a total encounter with a soldier on the battlefield, and I could hear him talking to me in my head, but I don't always get that. A lot of times I'll just get the knowledge of it without any words, and then sometimes I can actually hear somebody talking, which is crazy. Crazy and cool, but so I guess I have all of that. I'm clairvoyant, and I do, I pick up on stuff, and I just I try to keep it kind of low key because I don't claim that I can read people, give you a reading about what your future is going to be. But I'm I'm working on it.
Well, but that leads to, I'm going to finish with this, Susan, because I did talk about this to you before we started recording, but it's just crazy how, because I set up this interview before this happened, and sadly my dad passed. It was a week ago. We're recording this on Thursday, July 28th, and he passed on the 21st. And, you will not have a closer bond between a father and son. I mean, we were just so tight. I just loved him. But he was struggling for a long time. And so he had dementia and he had his leg amputated and he fought hard. He was in a nursing home for 8 years. To see him fading was really hard, but it was like, I'm going to be there every week. And it was heartbreaking, but he finally, he passed, a week ago. And the crazy thing was there were two things. His cousin was Bob Crane, Colonel Hogan from Hogan's Heroes. Bob was born in Waterbury, Connecticut, which is where my dad was from. And then Bob moved to Stamford, Connecticut, and then he went into radio and he went out to Hollywood and he became a television star and did some Disney films and all of that. But he was like a mentor to my dad. He was, he was like an older brother because he's 10 years older than my dad. And he helped my dad get into radio and he really encouraged him. And, again, my dad looked up to him because when my dad first heard Bob on the radio, he wanted to get into radio. And so that kind of plays into this.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
That's so hard.
Thank you, Susan. And I was almost going to reach out to you and put off the interview, maybe do another time, but I'm good. And the reason is because of what, from Friday through like Monday, I was just a mess. But, on the night that he passed at 4:30 p.m., he passed around 9:45 that night. Around 4:30 at my job, my 9 to 5, I got a call from somebody whose last name was Crane. And I wasn't reading into it or anything, but I just, oh, wow, Crane. And at that point, I couldn't wait to get out of work to see my dad because I had taken some days off, but the nurses are like, listen, you just do what you got to do because we can't say it's going to be today, tomorrow. It could be next week. It could be 2 weeks. So I was like, okay. And it was brutal going to work because I'm like, I don't want to be here. I just want to go see my dad. So I get the hell out of there at 5. I go straight to see him. And at that point, when I saw him, I just knew he was sleeping, but I knew. And I was, there alone with him and I was just tears coming down, and that was my goodbye. And then the nurses said, well, we're going to change him and this, that, and the other. And so my brother and I, he ended up showing up afterwards. We were like, okay, we're going to go because we don't want to see this. So I went home and literally like an hour and a half later, we got the word. My brother called and he said, Dad passed. The next night, I got home and I turned the television on. I just hit the power on the remote button and there's Bob. And he's looking right at me. There's an episode of Hogan's Heroes, and it's not just a scene where random characters in the scene, and there's Bob in the background. Bob's like right up front, looking right at me. I do keep in contact with his daughter Karen, who's out in California, and I reached out to her first just to let her know. I said my dad passed, and he's hanging with your dad now. I know it, And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." And I did tell her about the phone call with the guy last name Crane, and she goes, "Boy, you know what? Hey, that's a sign," And she thought that was cool. But then I just, another message to her, I said, Karen, I'm sorry. I don't want to weird you out here, but I came home and there's your dad on the screen. I took a picture. I said, here's what I saw. And she goes, oh my God. Well, now fast forward to Sunday, I have this necklace that I made and it was the dog tag it had on one side was my mother's initials, P.S., who, God bless her, she's still alive and well. I love her. P.S. for Pat Senich, and then on the other side, J.S. for my dad, Jim Senich, right? So I was wearing it that day, and I came home, and I just dropped it on the dresser, and next to it was the rosary beads, green rosary beads that I had gotten for my dad like 4 or 5 years ago, and I had taken them out of his room when the day before, on Saturday, we were cleaning out his room at the nursing home, and that was one of the things I wanted to keep, because I got it for him, and I know how important faith was to him, and he has strong Irish roots, and so it was just a really cool thing. And I said, you know what, I'm keeping this. So I had it on the dresser, and when I saw it there, I said, hey, it's all crumpled up here. Let's spread it out nicely, for Dad, right? And I spread it out, and I see the cross there at the bottom. It's looking nice, And again, turn the TV on, and now there's this mid-'90s documentary on St. Patrick from Ireland. And again, I try not to read into it, but I was like, wow, Ireland, And it's like, man, and my dad's mom's maiden name was Linnane, from Ireland. So, but then they flashed the Celtic Cross on the screen and they talked about how he had a big role in the Celtic Cross. And I was like, okay. And I got up to the dresser and I said, I believe it's a Celtic cross on those green beads. And sure enough, it was a Celtic cross on the bottom, like right there.
There you go.
Yeah, right. And to the left of it was the dog tag that I had dropped. And it was the JS was on the up side. So it was, my dad's initials there. And right next to it are his rosary beads. And there it is on the TV. So I Google quickly because I'm still like, nah, this can't be. And I Googled St. Patrick is known for, is what I Googled. And there it was. It said he's known for the Celtic cross. And that from that moment on, Susan, I was like, he's good.
Yeah.
And even more so, like Bob was the one that mentored him, and he's welcoming him into wherever he's going. And that from that moment on, I was like at peace.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he was like your dad in so many ways. Let you know that I'm good. I'm okay now.
Yeah.
In such better shape than when he passed, and his cousin Bob, made sure that you got the message loud and clear.
Unreal.
Yeah, that's wonderful, though. That really is really nice.
It is, because I always used to say, because, my dad was like my dad, friend, my idol. And I said, when he's gone, that's it. I'm done. But here I am. I'm okay. It's like,
yeah. And then, as we said, we talked earlier about this, that now he's on the other side with all of his, faculties he didn't have in life before he passed. So he's going to be guiding you and watching over you and probably sending you some signs. So I keep your eyes open for that.
There are always people that aren't going to believe in that stuff, and that's fine. But you know what? Hey, I've had pastors say, same thing happened with me with my mom when she passed. And then my friend Mike, his dad 2 years ago, same thing. And he goes to me today, goes, I was wondering how long it was going to take for him to show up. I was like, wow. Yeah. And my older brother had something where, like, in his sunroom, he was talking to my dad. He's like, all right, Dad, where are you? Seconds later, he had a picture frame with all of his family pictures in it, and this piece of metal from the frame on the bottom just came falling out, and it didn't even fall straight down. It fell. It's like in the middle of the room. Yeah,
the universe is fascinating that way.
Yeah.
And there'll be signs, he'll keep giving you signs because you're not supposed to give up. You're supposed to carry on the family tradition.
Yeah, and I will. That's for sure. And I wouldn't be doing this right now without him, because he got into radio, and I was like, I want to be in radio. He was a sports writer. I want to be a sports writer. It was like anything he did, I just, I was, there I was tagging along. I was his youngest son. And to anybody that has lost somebody, though, just, I guess the lesson is be open, right? Just.
Right. Be open, speak to them, pray to them, look for them in your dreams, because you will see them. And it's, it's so hard. I mean, losing a parent is something that, it's hard to even describe. My mom passed 6 weeks after Bon Scott died. She's been gone since 1980, and there isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about her.
Right.
But she's, I've seen her in my dreams. She has sent me many signs over the years, and so they're not here in the physical, but they're not gone.
Wow. Yeah, Susan, thanks so much. And people should go to your website, susanmasino.com. Lots to check out there. Photos of you with the bands over the years and some great articles. And your books on AC/DC, The 3 Generations of Hank Williams is in there, famous Wisconsin musicians, and your books on the paranormal, including The Secrets of the Universe, right? Is that the most recent one? Yeah, that is. I updated it in 2018, and then I updated The Story of AC/DC, Let There Be Rock in 2020. Okay. So, and all of them are available on Amazon. I knew it was going to be fun anyway, but this was an important talk with you, because I knew I was like, I got to tell her. So thank you. Well, thank you. And, God bless you and your dad and your family. And as I said, keep your eyes open, because you'll be hearing from him. Well, guess what, guys? Susan was right. Just a day after this interview, I was sending out some emails to friends who were thinking of me, sending out their condolences. I went outside right afterwards, and there was a butterfly that flew right past me. The color was yellow, the same color of the shirt I was wearing. Coincidence? I don't think so. I had to smile and give a quick, "Hi, Dad," as it flew off. Thanks, guys, for listening. This was an important episode for me, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. I'm Eric Senich, and join me again next time for another episode of Booked on Rock. And rest in peace, Dad. I love you.
That's it. It's in the books.